Live and we're recording. Oops, well, now we're recording. Siri tells us we're recording. So, well, welcome everyone to the Way to Wow, People Making Money. Thank you for joining us. This is our regular Thursday at 12:30 p.m., 3:30 p.m. Eastern time slot. And before I introduce our guest, I wanted to just do kind of my regular thing, which is recap. For the last couple of weeks, I talked about how to market yourself. And, if that's a concern for you, if you've always felt like self-promotion is something difficult for you to do, I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, The Way to Wow Show, on YouTube. Take a look at those archived episodes, and I think you will find a lot of great information there on how to market both yourself and if you have a business. Really the same thing these days. Marketing a business and marketing yourself are very, very similar. So there's some ideas there for you, and I would encourage you to take a look at that. Also, I want to mention coming up next week, my guest will be John Rubino. John is a Navy colleague of mine, and he started a real estate investment company with a partner called JID Investments. In fact, full disclosure, I am one of John's investors, and he's going to be talking about his path from going to the Merchant Marine Academy to becoming the chief operating officer of a real estate investment company. So I think you'll find that pretty interesting. Today, we have someone that, we haven't known each other very long, but I will tell you that to talk to Jennifer is really to be astonished at how much can be accomplished in a life in a relatively short period of time. So I could spend the entire hour talking about her biography, but I'm not going to do that because I really want you to hear what Jennifer has to say. But I do want to highlight a few things from her professional background, her work background. So Jennifer really started her professional journey with some companies whose names I think you will recognize: KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms, as well as the Walt Disney Company and Apple. Only the largest company in the world and the largest entertainment company in the world. I mean, kind of a schlepper there, huh?
Well, actually, while I was at Apple, they reached, I think, the $2 trillion market cap and became the most valuable company in the world. Well, it was like my first week there, but I still took credit.
As well you should, right? So then, in the succeeding years, Jennifer held positions in marketing, in operations. She was a COO of a company, as well as in finance and funding of companies. So she's this term, I think it's a little bit overused, but a serial entrepreneur. And she also founded and co-founded several companies, including the company where she's currently the CEO, Playform.io, which I think you will find quite fascinating. And we'll get to that as we progress through Jennifer's professional life. So Jennifer Chang, first of all, thank you very much for coming on The Way to Wow, People Making Money. Appreciate having you here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's always great to, just talk and meet new people, as well as just share my story in case it's relevant for anyone out there.
Yeah, I think it will be. I think it will be. So start us out. Where did the desire to, be in business, to have your own company, or be a serial entrepreneur, where do you think that came from?
Yeah, so I come from a family of entrepreneurs, for one, but I think really what led me down this path is I grew up in a immigrant community in Southern California, and so I grew up in this Korean American community of recent immigrants from South Korea, and it's really common within these immigrant communities that everyone has a small business. There's language and cultural barriers that will keep immigrants out of the corporate workforce, as well as just kind of other, systematic issues. And so growing up, I didn't know anyone with a corporate job. I only knew people who were, managing their own business or working for a friend or family member's business. Like pretty much that's how everyone in my community operated, including my dad. So my dad was a CPA within the immigrant community. He specialized in all of these small businesses. And he had a small little practice that he had built when I was a kid. And it was, I think it just gave me such really interesting exposure into what business is like, because these small businesses are just so accessible for children. So my mom, my whole family had all these different businesses throughout the community, it didn't require a commute to get to. And so often my mom would be, running errands in an area, and she would drop me off at my uncle's video rental shop so that I can hang out there while she ran errands. I would tag along with my dad while he visited clients, and we'd go to like liquor stores where they gave me candy, or go to the dry cleaners, or, there might be a factory and there's like a tiny little office in the back that he'd be having a meeting, and I'd like wander around and look at what people are doing. Just early on, I got so much exposure to business on a really hands-on level. I loved playing with office supplies. I loved restocking. The video rental shop was actually one of my favorites because it was so much fun to restock the shelves. My grandparents had like a Penguins franchise. I would work the register. But all of these experiences, I think really made it that I had a, unique insight into what business was like. I wasn't really scared of the idea of starting a business because everyone around me was constantly starting businesses. But my dad, of course, as the immigrant father, always had these like bigger aspirations for me. And, I remember on our way to Koreatown, we'd drive by downtown, and my dad would always point out the tall buildings, and he'd go, "You're going to work there one day." And so, I believed my dad, and I pursued that path. So I went to Berkeley, got my degree in business. I studied accounting and finance, very influenced by my father. And, true to my dad's vision, I did end up in one of those downtown towers at KPMG, my first job out of college. And I worked, I wore the suit and went to work, like sat in a cubicle and did all of that. But I always felt like something was missing. And I continued through that kind of corporate journey, going to, other companies. I was thinking like, I want to be more creative. So I went to Disney. I want to, try something else, go to Apple. But I think ultimately in the startup world, that's where I found, a way to apply the strategic expertise that I've learned from working from, through all my business degrees and working for these massive, very successful enterprises. But I got to bring it back to my roots, and, really also apply that like scrappy operational, skill set that you see within small immigrant businesses.
So for people who, and just, you saw the same thing in the, among Jews, probably more like 100 years ago, right? I mean, again, like you said, we couldn't get into corporate America, right? There's the famous, Woody Allen story about how he was the token Jew at this big firm he was working at, and he'd read his memos from, left to right or whatever it was, and yet by the time, interestingly enough, by the time I was getting ready to launch my career, so a lot of Jews by that time worked for big companies, and I had no experience, with relatives who own their own businesses. My grandfather did, but he had passed away when I was just a child. So for those of us who don't have that sort of built-in ability to be around small businesses and such, what do you think people could do to get that hands-on experience that I think is so important over and beyond what you could learn in business school?
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting you bring up the Jewish community, because I do notice throughout LA, like a lot of Koreans have bought the businesses from the Jewish families that have gone on, right? And there's definitely been kind of that pattern there. And so, and that's the really beautiful thing about America, right? Like one community comes in, they establish something, they work their way up, and then another community comes in behind them and does the same thing. So I do, credit the Jewish community for also like helping create a handbook for a lot of the other immigrant communities that came after. But in regards to what other people can do, I think it's all just about exposure. It's about, getting involved. So, I mean, for example, when I started off in the startup world, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, right? I had been around all these small, like mom and pop shops and restaurants and stuff like that, as well as these massive corporations. But, the idea of going into a tech startup, I mean, I had no clue what that meant. But, the way I found my route was I just, would look for any opportunity. I didn't really care what it was. My first startup was with a bunch of guys I met on Facebook. None of us knew what we were doing, but we all wanted to try it. And, my second startup was with my old boss from Disney. He wanted to start a company, and I was like, yeah, I'll work for cheap. Why not? I think it's really just about raising your hand and getting involved and just jumping in. It's like people think often, like I have a lot of friends who often kind of like look at my startup business experience and they go, oh, you must have learned that in your MBA. And I'm like, no, they did not teach me this in the MBA program at all. The best way to learn this type of work is really just to jump in, get exposure. In a lot of ways, I think having an apprentice type of mentality, where you find other people who are successful at it and just ask them, like, what can I do to follow you around? I worked for like nothing. I worked for equity. I worked way more than anyone would have paid me to at these, or could afford to pay me to at these companies. But, that also came with a lot of opportunities to like follow the CEO to a meeting, to a sales call, to, investor meetings. And as a result of just kind of following people around and just being that like kind of early apprentice, just kind of absorbing everything I could, I was able to pick up the skills and, really, apply that into my own career as well.
So, and I think that's terrific advice. I have a friend who works at NASA, and he says our kind of slogan should be just say yes. Because we're living in a just say no environment for marketing. You hear that a lot, but just say yes to these kind of opportunities and see where they lead. And I think the worst thing that happens is it's too much, or it's not where you want to go, and you say, okay, well, I had that experience, now I'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think entrepreneurship is necessarily fit for everyone. It is a very risky, kind of just chaotic journey. And, it suits certain personalities and it doesn't suit others. But I would also, caveat that by saying there's just so many different types of businesses, even if maybe this one category, like a tech startup, might not be for you. You might find that you're a fit for some other type of business. And so, it's really just about exploring, and doing, constantly saying yes and raising your hand and, doing anything that might interest you and seeing it through.
So if you would talk to us next about how you made that transition from corporate America to, being involved with your first startup. And in particular, if this was the case, maybe it wasn't, how did you deal with the, shall we say, disappointment maybe that your parents might have felt? One of the reasons I say that is I have a friend who, interestingly enough, is also Asian American, and she was in a very staid corporate job, and she decided to leave, and it was like an atom bomb went off in her house. So
I have the same story for sure. Yeah.
Please share that with us.
Well, I mean, the timing of my decision, I mean, when I look back, I'm like, I would say it was just all horrible decision making, but in the end, it turned out to be the right path. So in my case, I had a job at Disney in 2008. The digital team survived all the layoffs. No one got laid off after the crash. So I had a stable job. I was in a really great position, and it was fun. But the problem, at the time I was around 25 years old, and when the recession hit, that also just I didn't get laid off, but it dried up my projects. It made it so that the stuff I was working on was just not as exciting. The division I was in at Disney was really unique. It was a Disney ABC digital media team, which at the time was the team that put television online. So, the company was treating it like a startup within a big company. And essentially prior to the crash, we had these like unlimited budgets where, if we wanted to try something, we could. Whereas after the recession, it became, well, you have to find a sponsor for that. And, advertising dollars were also drying up. And it was just a really tough time, for businesses overall. So I got bored and some guys reached out to me on Facebook, and he was looking for the wrong Jennifer Chang from Berkeley, but like they were working on, yeah, step 2, have a generic name. But yeah, like, he reached out, he told me about his business, and I was like, this is really interesting. They were doing something around online video and making it social. And I had wrote my thesis on YouTube and online video, and social was kind of one of the trends that I had identified. The idea of people being able to participate in content, and so I flew up to Berkeley. I met them. It was a bunch of dudes in a house. It literally looked like HBO Silicon Valley. Like it couldn't be more factual to that. After a few months of working on this, I decided to quit Disney and join them full time for no salary because, I thought it was interesting. I was getting bored at work and I wanted something stimulating. Yes. And yeah, that was like an atom bomb in my family. My parents were really, I think my dad had some context to why I was like this because, he was like that himself. My mom had a really hard time of it. My parents are divorced. And my mom had a really hard time with my dad's entrepreneurial journey. And we did get in a big fight. I didn't talk to my mom for a year after that, just because like I couldn't handle the criticism of like, why did you do this? And like, on top of that, the business had failed. And, it was just a really difficult time. But that being said, it was, if you really stick to what you believe in, eventually people come around. I did make up with my mom, and, things did get back to normal. And, I continued to pursue the startup path. And, eventually I got to an exit and I did make some money and I took my mom to Paris. So that's kind of the full story. And, now my mom's very encouraging of what I do. She's kind of come to the place where it's like, she understands, she trusts that I know what I'm doing now. But yeah, it was a very difficult transition, and it was very difficult for my family. Cause like I said, my parents, they went through this immigrant journey of entrepreneurship because they had to. There weren't that many other options. And to then raise a daughter who goes on to Berkeley and gets these jobs like KPMG and Disney, and watch her go, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to go start a small business and take on all the risk that you guys had to take by force, but I'm doing voluntarily. It was difficult for them to process, like, why would you do that? We struggled so much to get you here.
I carried you in my body for 10 months.
Exactly. But I would say all's well that ends well.
Yeah. My mother oftentimes will watch these broadcasts, and I do have to say that when my first business finally did well, I bought her a TV. So you're making me look horrible by taking your money to Paris. Now, you mentioned that first business failed. So one of my, dictums is oftentimes we learn more from our failures than from our successes. Were there any lessons you learned from that first, startup opportunity not working out that you've been able to apply, to succeeding opportunities?
Yeah, I think having early failures is just really a blessing. I'm so glad I did this when I was young and dumb and didn't think twice. Like I said, it was horrible decision making, but it led me down a good path. My first startup, I really went into it not knowing anything. My team was also as inexperienced as I was. And we all, came out of that failure and have really thrived. It's really awesome to kind of see where my co-founders have ended up because they've all done really well themselves. My biggest lesson from that is I walked away from it just realizing that, starting a company is, especially these types of companies where you want to grow really fast and you have to build a team, you have to collaborate. There's only so much you can do by yourself. And I found it incredibly difficult to just, our working relationship was a disaster just because as things were happy, things would happen, there was, disappointments and we just unravel, we were humans. And particularly me, I would cry on so many conference calls. It was just really a disaster. And I walked away from that, really devastated. Don't get me wrong, failure sucks. But that being said, I felt like it exposed to me everything I didn't know. I finally could kind of identify what I did know, which was I could put together good presentations. I made really good sales decks. I was good at hustling and reaching out to people. I'd find everyone on social media because it was just so early back then. It wasn't as cluttered. And I would just reach out to people and say hi and get them to talk to us about the business. I was good at some of those things. I identified that through that process. But then there was this whole other area where I was I need to learn how to work on a team. And actually, you and I kind of were introduced to our mutual friend, Elliot, who's also part of this story, because after that failure, I decided to go to business school at USC. And, my real focus there was I want to work on everything that I've identified that I don't understand, right? I wanted to understand things kind of more tactical things like how does funding work, valuations and stuff like that. Because as we were fundraising, I realized I don't know what anyone's talking about. But as I mentioned, I also identified that I realized the most crucial thing about a startup is the ability to work on a team. And so when we went to business school, day one, they put you on these teams of 6 people. They kind of divide up the entire MBA class that way. And you're stuck with that team for the whole semester and you have to learn how to work together. And I saw it as an opportunity. And actually, Elliot was on my team. And Elliot and I are still really good friends to this day because our team was awesome. We had just such a great team. And, from the start, I told my team that the one thing I want to get out of this MBA experience is to learn how to work better with other people. And I was really intentional about it throughout the entire semester. And, I think that was just one of my biggest accomplishments in MBA. To walk away from that experience with a team that I worked with all semester. And actually at the end of the semester, we had to do some kind of survey about, team satisfaction. And our team came up number 1 in our core. And so, yeah, it was, so I think out of all these failures, you learn what you don't know, which then identifies what you can work on. And then you can work on that and, be more successful in the next round.
So there's this idea out there that rather than working to improve on your weak skills, if you will, we should double down on our strengths and make them even stronger. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I've always found that to be somewhat specious because I think it depends what our weak skills are, right? Some weak skills are just going to take us out. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it also depends on what you're doing, right? I think if you're working in this corporate environment where there's other people around that can fill in those weak skills for you, then yes, you can double down on your strengths, right? Because you just want to be really good at the one thing, right? If you're in sales, well, there's other people in the company that will handle the other areas. So you can focus on sales as long as, you're really awesome at sales and you're pulling your weight for the team. Everyone else can make up for the, kind of the weaknesses that you have. But that's different when you're an entrepreneur. When you're person number 1 or 2, and, you're getting the ball rolling and you just don't have the luxury of having all these different people around, right? At a startup, we don't have, or traditionally at a startup, you don't have someone that's there for HR and culture that's able to kind of put together the workshop so that we can all sit around and talk about how to work better together. And so it's something that the CEO has to do. And that everyone on the team has to just, pull their weight, some level, and so I think there is benefits to doubling down on your strengths. And there are, also other, situations that call for you to be more well-rounded. I think in my case, because I've pursued this entrepreneurship angle, and I just also just enjoy wearing lots of hats. I do feel like I've really kind of went down that route of like jack of all trades type of approach, more so than the doubling down on my strengths.
Yeah. So for a lot of people, I think it's difficult for us to be candid with ourselves, if you will, about what really are my shortcomings. And you mentioned you were very intentional about that process. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How did you, I think it's somewhat of a human reluctance not to want to look at, our shortcomings. So how did you sort of get yourself to really look at those in an intentional way? And then, from there, figure out, okay, how am I going to, improve my abilities in the areas that you identified that you need to work on?
I mean, I think a lot of it was just my was due to motivation, right? So, I came out of that first startup failure with this feeling of that sucked, and failing sucks, but I wanted to do it again, right? Like it was something I wanted to do. And I had a recognition that if I want to do this, there are things I need to do to adapt myself and to grow myself so that I could be successful, right? And so, I think going through that early experience kind of gave me insight into what are the success factors of starting a successful, scalable tech company. And since I want to do it again, I had the motivation to do that. I do think there's a lot of people who don't want to look at their weaknesses. That's true. And, I guess in my case, that just hasn't really been a thing. But one thing I would also question is like, you might have a weakness in one area, but, you might not want to address it. But it's also like, do you need to address it? Is it something that's holding you back? Right. In my case, I felt like this is something I want to do, and I don't want to allow my weaknesses to hold me back. So how do I work on those areas so that I can move forward? And if you're not identifying those weaknesses, you might also just want to look back and think about your motivation and intent. Maybe these are things that you don't really want to do, right? Like, I think a lot of times people don't necessarily, or I think a lot of it kind of comes with the fact that people are not honest about what they really want. People say a lot of things like, I want this job, I want to do this, I want to do that, but it might really be shaped by societal and outside pressures and not really from you. And the reason that you're not making the steps towards achieving that is probably because you don't really want it. Because in my experience, if you really genuinely want something, you will do anything to get it. And so in those, when I've identified weaknesses in areas of things that I really wanted, I find that I would work on myself versus other areas in my life where I might say like, oh, I want this, but I don't. And so, I don't really work on anything. But I think in those cases, you have to learn how to accept that's not what I actually want. And I'm not going to spend my time addressing a problem that's actually not real, because I don't need to fix this about myself when I don't want that.
And interesting. Very interesting. Very insightful. So take us now, if you will, to the next step. So you've got this one company kind of under your belt. It didn't work out. You went to USC, became a Trojan, fight on. My alma mater as well. Right, exactly. And so then coming out of, I assume it was an MBA program. Where did you go from there then, on kind of the next step of your journey?
Yeah. So during my MBA, I did a lot of internships. I did an internship with Apple over the summer, kind of that formal internship you do. Wonderful company, amazing place, awesome people, like really just some of the smartest people in the world are at that company. And I admire Apple as a brand and as a consumer. But I once again, I felt like, oh, this just isn't right. I don't feel like I want to be here. And then when I got back from my internship, someone forwarded me an email that Idea Lab, this incubator here in Pasadena, was hosting an open house because they wanted to find candidates for job openings. And so I was like, oh, that place sounds really cool. Like Idea Lab, like, I mean, the name and Bill Gross and all of what he's done. So I went there and I just kind of went around. I was still an MBA and I'm just like walking around talking to people. And I just met some really great people that I'm still actually friends with to this day, including one of the portfolio companies. The CTO and I were talking and he was like, you're awesome. Like, we'd love for you to work here. We don't have a job opening, but like, let's create one. And he took that to the rest of the team and they agreed. And they actually ended up creating a part-time job for me while I was an MBA. So, as you kind of go through the MBA experience, usually your summer internship comes back with an offer for a full-time job. But I really just loved my experience at this Idea Lab company. And on top of that, the CEO of the company was actually a woman who had, decades of experience in startups, as I was pointed out, like just, find people that you aspire to be and just like follow them around. And so that Julie Schoenfeld, she really became that person for me. She's just a phenomenal entrepreneur. Really haven't met anyone who's just as smart as her and capable as her in this field. And she basically made a full-time offer, and I was kind of like, there's Apple, or I could stay here. But ultimately, it was Julie. That was the reason I decided to stay at a startup rather than go back to Apple. And during the next year that I was there, I like I said, I got the opportunity to just follow her around. I got to sit in on meetings. I got to see how things worked. She let me sit in board meetings. I helped her prepare the board decks, and so she would let me sit in them. And I just got a lot more exposure and learned how to do this in a way, just on another level than what I had gone through in my first few startups, as well as even what you can learn in MBA. I just got kind of this next level of exposure. And so from there, it kind of cemented, this is where I belong and this is where I'm going to stay.
So it seems to me there's another factor building it maybe along this route, and that is you're gaining confidence in your own abilities. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think the more you do anything, you become more confident at it. And yeah, I definitely think it was a journey of, building confidence. And I was really fortunate because I had so many great mentors kind of rallying me on. Also while I was an MBA, I had the internship at Apple. I was doing all this like entrepreneurship stuff as well. And like interning for the Tech Coast Angels. And, I was doing a lot of different things. But I had a professor at USC, Kathy Allen, who was just really important, an important person in my career at that point, because she encouraged me so much. She, I had come out of this failure and I was thinking like, oh, I'm terrible at this. Like, I really want to do it, but like, I see all these weaknesses and I don't know if I can make it. When I met her, she's like, no, I mean, like 90% of these fail. Like, that's amazing that you've already started going down this path. And, she was just so encouraging, making introductions, and, kind of like, just like, yeah, she was like my cheerleader throughout my MBA. And I think that really helped me gain the confidence to take the next thing, which built even more confidence to the next thing. And so I would say like that journey, a lot of where that confidence came from was not just even like learning and growing in what I'm doing, but also the people that I met that encouraged me along the way.
Oh, so that's a perfect lead into my next question, which is throughout you've been talking about various people that you met, many of whom you're still in touch with to this day. So how did you initiate those relationships? How have you, for want of a better term, groomed them over the years? Talk to us about that aspect of it, if you would.
Yeah. So people will always say mentors are the most important thing, aspect of your career. And it's really like, it's the most true thing I would say. And, in regards to like, how do you attract mentors? I would say go be useful, right? Like I said, I would help Julie prepare the board deck. So she let me into the board meeting. Also while I was an MBA, I met my other mentor, Sarah Weinheimer, who was an angel investor that was part of Tech Coast Angels at the time. And I just worked on deals with her. I wanted to learn, and I helped her with due diligence. And that that helped, her kind of understand my capabilities. And, from there, working together was so much fun. And that's developed into a really amazing friendship. But I think, my advice to people who are seeking mentors, like, find a way to be useful. Usually the people worth having as mentors are very busy people. The people worth having as mentors tend to be successful. Successful people are busy. They have a lot of things going on. And so it's not necessarily easy for them to be able to just kind of make time to mentor you. But if you're able to come in and say, like, okay, how can I be helpful so that you have time to mentor me? How can I work alongside you? That tends to, open up and free their time so that they can do this. They will spend time teaching you how to do something when you're going to make their life easier. And so then it becomes a mutually beneficial relationship versus just like, the younger or less experienced person kind of going to someone and saying, please mentor me, please spend time on me. And rather it becomes, look, I'll help you find time so that you can invest in me.
Okay. Wow. Great. So now you're moving on in your career. Would you talk, how did you get from, shall we say, sort of the mid-level positions to where now you're an actual founder, right? And you're the one now working to inspire other people to come and join in your vision?
Yeah, that's true. So after the company that I was with at Idea Lab, which was called Perfect Market, I got cut, like they kind of had a massive layoff and then sold the company. And then since then it's gone through a great exit. At that time I was kind of like, what do I do next? And I was kind of wandering around, and once again, more mentors showed up and really encouraged me. Like, there's a guy, Andy Wilson, who encouraged me to just set up my own consulting practice. He was like, you're awesome. Like, you can do this for a bunch of startups, including me. So come work for me for a few hours and then go find some other clients. And so I just kind of started doing that. And one of the people I met as I was kind of walking around going, hey, startup consultant for hire, was a guy named Carl, who was working on an idea that he had for influencer monetization platform called FanBread. And, as I mentioned, I came out of Disney. I did a lot of early work for them around YouTube and social media. And so it was an area that I was really interested in. And, Carl was starting this business. It was just basically him with a PowerPoint deck at that point. And I just, once again, said yes. I raised my hand. I said, I want to be involved in this. Like, how do we make this happen? What can you pay me? Because I don't care. Whatever hours you're going to give me, I'll do more. And so I just kind of hung out there. And I even when there wasn't really much for me to do, I just kind of stuck around. I found other work so that I can, pay my bills. And I was really just passionate about this idea. And so as we started the company and as it started to grow, since I was just there first, I ended up in the role of COO, where eventually, it turned out that I was running marketing operations and finance. And, I had my hands in all kinds of things, and I just was applying everything I could into it. But it was definitely a very different experience this time around, because now I was the leader. Now everyone was looking to me for what to do. Now I was setting the culture. I had a really great business partner in Carl. He was, just a phenomenal person to work with. And we built a really amazing team. Through that role, I really got to flex and stretch in a way that I hadn't prior to that. And, we actually did get acquired. So I had to work through an acquisition as well, which was like a whole other adventure. I think it was just kind of this progression, but it all came with that same attitude that I had, which was, I had a growth mentality of, I want to do something more this time. And once again, me just kind of following around people that I found interesting, that I wanted to work with and learn from. It took a lot of patience, right? Like, this company took a while to build. I think it was really like a year and a half until they brought me on, full time. I didn't have to have other jobs to help support myself. But it was something I really wanted to do. And it was a really great role in which I got to really step it up to another level.
Yeah. Can't remember who said this quote, but somebody, it's probably back in the 70s, said something along the lines of, always, work toward what you want to do, give it everything you've got, just, don't run out of money, basically, right? You still have to support yourself. So you mentioned, you had other ways of keeping the cash flowing. Would you talk about that just a little bit? Because I think for a lot of people, the prospect of, going to work for a startup and even saying, look, pay me whatever you can pay me, but I'll give you everything that I've got, that all by itself seems, if not frightening, somewhat, almost crazy, because why do you want to give away your time for free, right? It's all, in the end, it's all we really have.
Yeah. And this is a real challenge. And I think why we don't have a lot of diversity in the startup world. Like, I think this is a real problem. I wish there was more government funding or some programs that could really help people who want to pursue this path and might not have the finances to do so. Because I mean, for me, it was a huge challenge as well. But a couple of things that I did do, while I was working on Bandbread, I also worked for a bunch of other startups. And so, I would just kind of find all these companies that were early stage, might have a little bit of funding, but couldn't afford, to pay me a full-time salary. And so I would just kind of put like a few hours here, a few hours there, a few hours there. And, across all of that, managed to make enough to pay the bills. And, it was very, I had to deal with a lot of instability though, and a lot of like that, income insecurity, because you just kind of never know. But that being said, I also found that there was a little bit of security in the way I was working, because I had so many different companies I was working with. So if one cut me, there was another one that might have more hours, where I can replace just one, like a percentage of my income versus the entire income. So, there was that benefit of that as well. Another strategy that I actually also pursued was America, and especially Los Angeles and some of these big cities, is incredibly expensive. And there is an arbitrage to be had by just leaving the country. So during this time, actually, one of the things I did do in regards to cash flow is I sublet my apartment and I went off to Southeast Asia for a while.
Wow.
And so, yeah, like I went off to Bali. This was back in the days, this was 2014, 15, when people were just kind of starting to talk about digital nomads and, these people that were wandering around the world. I had already done a trip around the world back in 2007. And I was just kind of comfortable with travel. So when I read about these people that were going off to Bali and being digital nomads, and they have co-working spaces there, I was like, okay, I could do that too. So I just packed up my bags, rented out the, expenses, sublet that out to someone else. And I just went off to Bali and, hung out in the jungle on an island and worked out of a co-working space that monkeys would visit. I also spent some time in Korea, which was also a really interesting experience, because I am Korean American and bilingual. And then at the time, there was just this burgeoning startup scene out there, and I was able to, also work with some of the Korean startups I met. I was in the Philippines, Kuala Lumpur, these were all really cheap compared to America. So, based off the income that I was collecting in my bank account, from American clients, and then living at the cost of living in Southeast Asia, I was also able to kind of further stretch out my finances to help me kind of get through that dry part of income wise.
Yeah. Wow. So we're don't have a whole lot of time left. So I want to make sure we have we take a little bit of time to talk about your current venture, playform.io. So if you would tell us about that, how you got involved with that, what it's about, and kind of what is the next, phase of Jennifer Chang's professional life?
Yeah, so playform.io is actually incredibly exciting. And we're working on, just kind of things that feel like science fiction. It's truly remarkable. So, just a little context, there was the .com, which we'll call Web 1. And that was when kind of the internet started, right? I was in high school at the time, and, I was, Steve Case got America Online, including me. And, and then there was Web 2, which is really marked by social media. That was the ability for us to interact through the internet. And, that actually was like kind of the driving force throughout my career. All the different companies I was with, I was kind of that social media expert. I had worked on social media strategy at Disney, and, throughout all the different companies I've started, they were all really in that social media space. And so, as I mentioned, like, I kind of figured out this new strategy after, that led me into FanBread, which was go work with a bunch of different startups and then just try to find, one that you want to really stick around with. So throughout the pandemic, I was working with I think I worked with like a dozen companies during the pandemic. I was really busy, and it was I actually really enjoyed working throughout the pandemic in that way, because I was able to work with companies all over the world. Location didn't matter. And, everything was through the internet. Also, I had no distractions. So, I was pretty much working 24/7, which sounds horrible, but not if you really enjoy what you're doing. And I was really having fun. I was working on all these cool new ideas about what could happen in this post-pandemic phase.
Mhm.
And so one of the people I met through that was Ahmed Al-Gamal, who was a professor of computer vision at Rutgers University and had raised money from Khosla Ventures to start Playform. The basis of the company was his early R&D in regards to AI generated art. So Ahmed created the first autonomous AI to create artworks that passed the Turing test in 2017, which sounds like science fiction. And that's why it was massive news, and it was kind of in all the major publications. Caught the attention of Khosla Ventures, who invested in the company. When he and I started working together in June 2020, he had built a product, and he was trying to figure out, what do you do with this? Where's the product market fit? And as I was talking to him, he was like, yeah, there's the most active users are these people that are doing something called crypto art. They use the AI to generate all these different artworks, and then they go sell it on these websites like Super Rare, and it's for Ethereum and cryptocurrency. And he was just like, I don't know what they're doing, but that tends to be who's on the site. And so, that really intrigued me. I was like, okay, this, we're a tool for generating AI art. And, it made sense that, these early crypto art, NFT, which now we call NFT art, artists were, really gravitating towards this software. And so I created a residency program so that we can get to know our users a bit better, one by one. And we brought in one of these artists that we had recognized was using our platform specifically for this type of crypto art. And we collaborated and learned from him. And as we were doing that, we launched our exhibition late 2020. And it went up on Super Rare. That all of a sudden the ETH price starts climbing like crazy.
Wow.
And we ended up selling out the entire collection. So at that point, I was pretty much like, oh wow, okay, this thing can actually go somewhere. It kind of came out of nowhere. And this was kind of serendipitous, because this was when NFT art was working, just kind of starting to take off. And then in March 2021, it was kind of like the NFT, shot, like the shot heard around the world kind of thing, where there was an NFT created by Beeple, which sold for $69 million at a Christie's auction. Just got the entire world excited about NFTs after that. Shortly after that, I was watching SNL, and they did a skit on NFTs, and I was like, wow. I had been talking about NFTs during Thanksgiving, and my family had been making fun of me, like, what the hell is she talking about? Because I was like, the next thing is crypto art, guys. We're going to sell digital files with cryptocurrency. And my family was just kind of like, oh, it's so funny. And then actually after the SNL skit aired, my brother-in-law reached out to me. He's like, oh my God, how did you know about this already? He thought I could tell the future or something. But yeah, so, the company has just been on such an exciting journey, because we already had, these early adopters of NFTs on our platform. And over the last year, we've been experimenting with just a bunch of different, strategies, kind of learning from the artists, as just watching this industry develop, because it's just been chaos. I would say, unlike Web 1 and Web 2, Web 3 has hit us like a Mack truck. It's just kind of accelerated by COVID, and it's just been faster than any other tech trend I've ever seen. You usually get an on-ramp on Whereas with NFTs, like it's just like straight on and 0 to 60 in 10 seconds kind of feel. So over the last year, it was just really a steep learning curve where we've been experimenting and learning, and just I'll talk to anyone who will reach out, just because I'm like, what do you know? And then from there, earlier this year, we launched our NFT marketplace, which is called ArtMine, and it's a new way of buying AI generated art as NFTs. And that's kind of in a beta right now, and we're working on getting to the full launch. But the company is just in a really exciting category. And as I've been learning more and more about NFTs, the technology, and just watching the market behavior around them, I'm increasingly convinced that we are onto something really massive. I recently shared an article on LinkedIn where I talk about why I'm bullish on NFTs from a woman's point of view. And I wrote it because when I talk about NFTs with, majority of the market is male at this point. Like when I go to these crypto events, NFT events, like I'm one of a very few number of women. And so, the guys, like, the big use case that has come out of NFT so far are things like NBA Top Shots, and, there's all kinds of new cool art that's coming out, but a lot of it's very like male centric tastes. And then there's things like the Bored Ape Club, and so people hear this stuff and they go like, yeah, that's not for me, like this doesn't make any sense. And I totally relate to that, because I look at NBA Top Shots and I'm like, wait, you put a ball through a hoop and then you want to collect this because why? LeBron, okay, sure, like great, I know he's important, like, but I mean, I just don't really care. So when, the way I wrote my blog was I wanted to talk about, reference points of, regarding this technology that women could understand. Because even while those use cases aren't really live yet in the Web3 world, I know they'll come, right? Like this is the same trend we saw with the .com and Web2 as well, where, a lot of the early adopters tend to be men. But then, like with social media, for example, the early adopters were men, and then women became the majority users of social media over time. And I believe the same thing's going to happen with NFTs. And I think it's important that we get more women into this ecosystem so that they can benefit from that activity. And so I wrote my article, like talking about, different reference points that are more relevant to women, really centered around the Birkin bag, the Hermes handbag, that if you're a woman, you have seen, it's been featured on Sex and the City. They had a whole episode on it. It's this, and the way I see it is like, the activity that we're seeing around NFTs today is very similar to the activity that we've seen around exclusive products at, throughout history, right? Look at the Birkin bag. It's a bag that's really hard to get. If you want to get one, you have to pay tens of thousands of dollars and sit on a wait list. And, the really exciting thing about NFTs is that there is an automation of a smart contract that can essentially artificially restrict scarcity. The contract says, only 100 of these NFTs can be sold. Well, then only 100 of these NFTs can be sold. The contract is immutable. You can't override it. And so there's kind of, and it's also living on a distributed ledger that no one has the ability to override and fix. And so you can trust that this network is going to make sure that only 100 of these NFTs are ever available. Similar to the way that, Hermes will control the production of Birkin bags so that yours will always be rare. The blockchain also provides the ability to resell this stuff because you can transfer it under these smart contract terms. So if you have one of those 100 NFTs, well, they can only be 100, but you can sell it to someone else. Similar to, every woman I know who invests, not purchase a $20,000, $30,000 Birkin bag, justifies it to themselves that they can always resell it. And that is, and that is also, kind of how you think about NFTs. You can always resell it. And then last, the really exciting thing that I'm seeing right now is just that, the transparency of this technology is also really interesting. A lot of people might not know this, but like every single transaction on the blockchain, you can look up on the blockchain Etherscan or a Polygon scan or whatever, ledger visibility that exists within that blockchain. And so, when you own a Bored Ape, everyone can see that you own a Bored Ape, that it's going to your wallet. Just as if I carry a Birkin bag out, everyone can see it's a Birkin bag, and they're, and the associations with that are massive. Like if someone sees a Twitter profile pics now can be NFT verified. So, a lot of people have their, NFT Bored Ape, which is, I don't even know how much it costs now, but I think it's over 100,000. It's $100,000 NFT. It's a picture of an ape, but and it's like that in itself is not worth $100,000. I agree. But what people don't understand is what that access gives you when you verify your Bored Ape on Twitter and people see, oh, they have a Bored Ape, like within the NFT community, that's a big deal. That means people are going to reach out to you and say like, hey, like you're an influencer, can you help me out? Or they're going to invite you to a party. There's a lot of other NFT projects out there that will just basically give a free NFT to everyone who's already in the Bored Ape Club. And so there is this like actual value because everyone can see that you own one. And, just as if you have a Birkin bag, people are going to be a little nicer to you at that party. If you have a Bored Ape, people are going to be a lot nicer to you on Twitter. And, so I'm seeing this kind of like, I'm seeing a lot of potential for this technology that I just don't think a lot of people fully understand yet. And I'm really trying to share it because I think this is a massive opportunity for anyone who's in the creative field. It's a massive opportunity for enterprises with brands, but like just the opportunities here, it's just another gold rush. And I would love to see more people be able to benefit from that and, work their way to wow.
There you go. Well, unfortunately, we are almost out of time, but I have several questions rolling around my head, things about, no longer having, issues with provenance the way you do with art and so many things like that seem that this technology is dealing with, and yet there still must be opportunity for, forgeries but unfortunately we'll have to save that for another time.
Well, but just to that point, of course there's going to be forgery, right? But that's the thing, like this is just so early, like as forgery becomes a problem, we're going to build tools for that. Right? Actually, my company has some technology we know we can apply on that in the future. Right now, there's really no reason to stop and focus on that because NFTs are just kind of flying off the shelves and we're focused on getting new people into the market. But these are all like, as we're identifying all these problems within the blockchain and NFTs, I see them all as, okay, that can be solved, that can be solved, that can be solved. I'm not really focusing on what it is today, but what it can be in the future.
Well, we're going to have to check in with you, in the future to see how this is all developing, because it is quite fascinating. And I agree with you. There is a there. And this is really early stage. So Jennifer, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and talking with me today. I knew you were going to be fascinating and you exceeded all expectations. So thank you very, very much. I just want to wrap up the show by reminding people that we are here every Wednesday at 12:30, The Way to Wow, People Making Money. Next week, again, my guest is going to be John Rubino of JID Investments, and he's going to be talking about his journey from student at the Merchant Marine Academy to running a real estate investment company. So if you know of someone who has a remarkable way of making a living, and you think they would be a good guest on the show, please go to our website, thewaytowowshow.com, drop me a note. And if you have an idea for a show, one of the new initiatives is we're expanding the Way to Wow brand. I mentioned last week as well, my friend Leah Siegel, her show will be launching on March 3rd, and her show is called The Way to Wow, Securing Your Financial Foundation. So Leah is a financial advisor, and she's going to be talking about how to be financially secure and how to build wealth. So, and I'd love to have someone who really can dig into creating relationships, talking about that, and all the other subjects there in the 3 pillars of attainment that you can see over my shoulder. So again, thank you all very, very much for watching. And as I make it my practice, I want to sign off by just reminding Marie, darling, up in heaven, you are still my belle. Thank you all.